All right, today we're talking about how to take inspiration from world leaders or maybe leaders in your life and then to fuel that into a lifetime of entrepreneurship and to fuel that into being a better entrepreneur. My guest today is Shelby Joy Scarbrough. I'll tell you more about her in a second, so stay tuned.
Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of this show, and each week I get to talk to interesting and smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs from all kinds of companies. You can check out the archives. We've had Netflix and Grubhub, Redfin, Gusto, Kinko's, YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, lots of great guests. Check out those archives. And this episode brought to you by my company, Rise 25, where we help B2B businesses get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with Done For You podcasts and content marketing. And you can learn more about us at rise25.com or email us at support@rise25.com. And by the way, if you like this episode, you might also enjoy past episodes with Warren Rustin and David Anderson. Go check out the archives for their names. Those are two names that Shelby knows, I know. And let me tell you about Shelby. So this is someone I've wanted to interview for quite some time. I'm really excited about this episode. She is the co-founder and CEO of the Global School of Entrepreneurship. She's also an author, published several books about a variety of different topics, including the power of civility. We're going to get into that one in particular. And she has had a long and varied career, starting like interestingly, we both grew up in Southern California, and one of our first jobs was going to work at the White House. She worked in the Reagan administration. I worked in the Clinton administration. She went on and has been very heavily involved in entrepreneurs organization, as I have, although she served as global board president. I haven't served in that distinguished role before, so we thank you for her service on that. And she also has built up a bunch of Burger King franchises, which might seem like a little bit off of the beaten path there, but I love these winding stories and hearing them. But Shelby, a pleasure to have you here today. And I want to get into the stories about working in the Reagan administration, the White House, and the State Department, all those different roles that you had. But first, you grew up around entrepreneurship. Your parents actually started a Burger King franchise and actually started a number of different Burger King locations when you were kids. So you kind of grew up around the restaurant business and sweeping floors and things like that. What was that like?
Well, it was probably the greatest introduction to entrepreneurship there could ever be. Thank you for having me, by the way. I was, about 14 when they started the process of thinking about becoming Burger King franchisees. And while it's a longer story, the bottom line is my mother became the first female franchisee for Burger King and probably one of the first female franchisees in the franchise community as a whole. I can't prove that, but I would put money on it that she might have been the first or among the first. And they decided to do business together. And so they created a model for me, too, of partnership and what a partnership looks like in business. And I've always longed for and loved working with other partners as peers versus sort of this long slog of working as an independent entrepreneur. So that's the thing that really stood out to me, as well as an incredible work ethic that was put in front of me. Like you said, sweeping floors. I did every job in the Burger King, from the sweeping the floors to the cleaning the bathrooms, to taking orders, to inventory, to taking apart the shake machine, to going through every single bit of the management training that needed. We had Whopper College, which was the Burger King college. Hamburger U was McDonald's. So I went to Whopper College in between my summer breaks of college, et cetera. So I was very invested. Our whole family was.
Now, of my guests that grew up around entrepreneurship, I'd say they kind of go in two different paths. Some go down a path of, I'm never going to get involved in this ever again. This sounds nightmarish, and they run from entrepreneurship. And then others, they decide it's life for them. So what was, did you ever resent it at any point? Did you have to come around to it? Or did you feel like, I really like this life?
So the concept of entrepreneurship just stuck, right? That was the sticky tape that came out of that for me. When I went working at the White House, it was a very different perspective, as you were there, and it's a completely different world. But working specifically in the White House, it's at the highest levels of government, so perfection is essentially required. And while we know that's not possible, it's the highest, expertise, the professionalism, et cetera. It's a great example of how you're supposed to approach your work and life in general. So marrying those two concepts for me was helped me when I launched my business after I left the Reagan administration. The two concepts there of this high level professionalism and attention to detail, and then the business entrepreneurial spirit and the need for process and professionalism was all part of the same thing and helped me launch Practical Protocol a long time ago.
So I get asked a lot, how did I get a job at the White House? I'm sure you get it a lot. So how did you get your into the Reagan administration?
Well, I joke it's because I don't like salami sandwiches.
Wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, I was at the political convention. We just saw one happen recently, but political convention in Dallas, and I was one of the youth volunteers that was painting signs and just doing all the things that rallies and stuff like that. And
this is 84 for the
84.
re-election?
Yeah, it was a long time ago. I was very young. I was super, super young.
Yeah.
I brought in, they brought in a big stack of sandwiches that were all crushed and, on one on top of each other for like 2,000 volunteers. And I just couldn't stomach it. It was salami on white bread and it was terrible. So I just, instead of standing there sort of looking like a dork, not doing anything, I got on the other side of the table and started handing out, that's the Burger King training, which is never be idle, right? So just find something to do. There's always something to be done. So I got around the other side of the table and started handing these horrible sandwiches out with the people who became friends and colleagues. And, again, longer story, but it rolled one thing went right into the other. And within 6 weeks or 8 weeks, I had been offered a job on the inaugural committee and 6 weeks later in the White House.
And what was that experience like for you going to work at the White House?
It's a little intimidating, but exciting, massively exciting. My job was to work with everybody throughout the White House to help plan the president's travel everywhere, his trips. So it wasn't, we would go out and see where he was going and then come back to the White House and communicate that. And so we were sort of the hub of the wheel of the communication tool of what was happening when and essentially make it happen. And we were on all of the overseas trips, embedded, in the advanced team locally and on the international trips, which was just fascinating. So I got to be in some of the places where everything was happening, all of the economic summits in Venice and Japan and Canada and you name it. And then also I got to be in Germany at the Berlin Wall as a guest because we had just come from Venice. So I got to watch President Reagan say the famous words, "Tear down this wall."
Wow. Did you realize at the time? I know that a cheer went up when he said that. Yes. When you heard that, were you like, "Oh my God, that's going to be, we're going to be hearing this for years to come"?
Yeah, well, we knew what he was going to say because we'd watched the process of the speech going back and forth to the State Department and National Security Council and all the powers that be that have a say in what should be said in the speech, and watched that line kind of come in and out, and the president really felt very strongly about that. I talk about that a lot in my world of civility and protocol because he had a relationship with Gorbachev at that time that the way he said it and what he said wasn't as confrontational as it appeared to be. And so he had the confidence in that relationship to be able to set a challenge without it being a threat, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yes, we knew it was going to happen. And it's interesting to note how, I think we thought it was going to be historic, but certainly it has lasted the test of time for sure.
For sure. Yeah. What was that like? Now, for those who don't know what goes into these trips, it's weeks in advance, or months in advance for an international trip where you go out there and you have to interact with, in the case of a foreign trip, dignitaries from other countries. The U.S. and the Soviet Union were not on the best of terms during the 1988 Reagan-Gorbachev summit in Moscow. What was that like for you going there and having, I imagine, a lot of security around, Secret Service involved, and you have to negotiate with your Russian counterparts or Soviet counterparts at the time?
Yes. I remember sitting at a table in a dacha, a Russian dacha in the middle of Moscow, so a country home in the middle of the city. And it was with the chief of protocol on the other side of the table and our team. I was part of the team. And they said, well, this is what we would like. This is, we would like, I think it was specifically the microphones and certain things with the placement of microphones in a room and the podium and that kind of thing. I'm down to those level of details, right? We want it right here. Yeah. They wanted it someplace else. And so they would say this famous line that we talked about a lot would be, "That's no problem. It's impossible."
That's no problem. It's impossible. That's
That's no
odd.
problem. And so from that day forward, I mean, those are jokes that we still have as colleagues. That's no problem. It's impossible. So, or they would eventually agree, and then on the day of, they just had it the way they wanted it in the first place. So the trust and respect wasn't quite there, but it was very important to understand who you're dealing with, and we dealt with it very professionally. We were told never to speak outside of what I called sort of the walk-in refrigerator, because that's what it looked like to me from my restaurant days. But it was a big box, inside of a room, and you went in, and it was
It's a
soundproof,
safe place to
and they
speak.
were
Yeah. Yeah.
microwaving that thing to death, trying to hear what we were saying. But that's where we would talk, and we were advised not to, if we had disagreements on any part of the schedule or about anything, that we should go into that room and close the door behind us, and not do it in the halls of they called the Knob, the new office building, which was the new embassy in Moscow, which they never really moved into because it was riddled with bugs,
Hmm.
listening devices. So
Hmm.
if they said, just if you want to have a conversation, just remember everybody's listening.
Hmm.
So you have to go in, and if you're going to argue with each other, or they didn't want us to show any dissension, because there were things that we would have conversation. Well, should we do this or that? Well, they didn't want us to reveal any of that.
Hmm.
And
That thought
the
process.
sausage making.
Yeah, yeah. Even though that's totally natural for Americans to have those types of conversations, that's why we hash out, our decisions and things like that.
Yeah.
Um, what do you take from that experience of working with President Reagan today? What do you remember back of being around him? Because I've been heavily shaped by the leaders that I've been around. I
Yeah.
think we all, especially at a young age in your early 20s, working for a leader like that, a strong leader. What do you take from that experience, or what do you remember about him?
Well, he saw the humanity in everybody, and he had humble beginnings, and he worked his way up to the top post in the country, and he never forgot where he came from. He wasn't an elitist. He was a man of the people, but he had accomplished quite a few things in his life. He was one of those people. I know you worked for President Clinton, and so to contrast the two of them, in an interesting way that I've noticed, that President Reagan was somebody who didn't necessarily know everybody's name off the top of their head, but he knew who they were, and he engaged with people and had a good rapport. President Clinton also had a good rapport, as I understand it, with people within the White House, but he was like brilliant with names, right? I mean, he always remembered people's names. To me, that's an amazing quality in a politician or in anybody to remember. And I think
Especially for a world leader. Yeah.
yeah, George
Yeah.
Bush and both Bushes also had that capability. I don't. I don't have that kind of recall necessarily, but I do respect and admire the ability to connect with the individual, which all of those people have that ability to do.
Yeah.
And President Reagan's, I of course I believed in what he believed in, and I really felt comfortable supporting his platform and the goals that he was trying to achieve for the country. And he knew who he was, and he stuck with it, and he was true to his character traits. He was true to his beliefs. And I think those were really interesting and informative and formative positions for me as a young person.
Yeah. Another thing that he's kind of remembered for is just distilling things down to a very simple phrase, or or an idea or something like that. He had very cute, a lot of little like witticisms and things like that, where he would, kind of distill down a big concept. And I think that that's a true sign of intelligence, not using, big words all the time that people don't understand, but to articulate and to explain and communicate something in a way that people can understand. People often ask me about, I've had the fortune of meeting 3 presidents now, possibly a 4th. And they've asked me a lot about the charisma around them, what it's like.
Yeah.
And they all have kind of different charisma, but it's interesting, to your point, like seeing those types of world leaders who've gotten, in many cases, come from very humble roots to the highest office in the land. They have to have incredible charisma. Even if they don't remember someone's name, just when they talk to people walk away feeling like they were heard, or feeling like that person knows me or understands me. That is a profound thing. For sure.
This is true. It makes you want to help them achieve their goals.
And yep, right. And that's how they, rally large groups of people to help them with the causes they're working on. You go on from the White House to the State Department, where you served as a protocol officer. What is that? What is a protocol officer?
So it's very similar to Presidential Advance, which is the office I was working in the White House, where we handled the logistics for the principal involved. So at the White House, it was President Reagan, one client, many venues, if you think of it that way. And with the State Department, it was many clients, meaning heads of state, kings, queens, prime ministers, foreign ministers, and that's the no further down the rung than that would we handle them and coming into the country to visit the president of the United States. So fundamentally, there were maybe 3 or 4 venues. There was the White House, the State Department, Capitol Hill, Andrews Air Force Base, Blair House, or the hotel that they were staying in, that kind of thing. So the program would be sort of standard, because we treated all the guests similarly, right? Yeah. That's part of the protocol. On the other hand, the details were extremely different in each case, just because of the nature of who was coming, the culture, the idiosyncrasies of the relationship with the U.S., the policy situations going on at the time. So it was dynamic in a different environment and very busy.
Yeah, and that was such a fascinating thing about working at the White House. My job could be very mundane sometimes because I was like sitting and writing. I mean, geez, these days it could be ChatGPT, right? But yeah. But I was sitting and writing letters and proclamations and this book over my shoulder here and things like that. And so it could be quite mundane. But then I'd go to the bathroom and there would be the president of the United States arguing with the premier of China in the hallway, like with no cameras around and 50 security personnel, and they're arguing over something, with the translators up in there. And it's like, oh my God, Yeah. But if you recall back, during those experiences, you probably observed a lot of interesting world leaders and interesting dynamics, kings, queens, shahs, presidents, maybe without naming names. Any interesting stories from those experiences of world leaders that you saw, I don't know, slap an underling or anything interesting like that?
I had a world leader who flew commercial. Okay, so that gives you the level of the leader, meaning the small country.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have their own fleet, et cetera. But we were at Dulles Airport and taking them out. This was before TSA, before 9/11. Yeah. So we called them the red coats. The security guys all wore red coats or orange coats, maybe some orange coats. And so we were taking them through security, and Secret Service took the principal, the president of the country, around security as a courtesy and took them straight to the Air France lounge. And I took the rest of the delegation, including the ambassador, through security, and I was escorting them through security. Well, all of a sudden, all these orange coats or whatever they were at the time, TSA types, security came surrounding the one bag that went through that the ambassador had carried and put on the X-ray machine. And the X-ray, they all said, "There's a gun in here." And I looked at the ambassador and said, "They say there's a gun. We need to open it up." He said, "I can't open it." And I said, "Well, it's your bag." He says, "No, it's not my bag. It's the president's bag." Mm-hmm. And I said, "Okay, well, I guess we got to go see the president." So we went to the lounge, and I had to say to the president, "I'm sorry, if there's a gun in here, we need to open it up, secure it, make sure that it's separate from any ammunition. We will give it to the pilots. They will carry it and they will return it to you upon landing." And he was so mad. He was not very happy. And I said, "I'm sorry, this is the way it goes." And he said maybe they weren't on there he said some other airline. And he said, "Well, they let me do it all the time." I go, "Well, remind me not to fly with them." The airline was,
Yeah.
So we did this and separated it out and everything. If he had just carried his own bag, it just would have slipped through. He wouldn't have. Yeah. He didn't go through security. And so when they went to go get on the plane, I was there as the official representative representing the president of the United States, just to bid him farewell, and he wouldn't shake my hand. Snubbed me and walked by.
Now, reflecting back on that now, what was that like for you as a young woman? This is 35 years ago or something like that, representing the United States, having to stand up to a world leader and say, "We are going into your bag." And that's just one example of many times when you were representing the United States of America, and you had to put your foot down and, advocate for your position.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question when I start to think back on it, because I don't know that I was thinking about the weight of it at the time. I just was doing what I knew my job to be, and it was to be both diplomatic, but make it happen and get the job done and do the right job. And I knew what the rules were. So I knew where we could bend the rules. I knew where, and bending the rules isn't really the right word, but where there's flexibility in a yes or no.
Yeah.
And to make something happen. That was our goal always, was to try to make it work if we could. It wasn't to be an impediment to anything, because we were in effect an extension of the diplomacy of foreign policy in a way.
Yeah.
So I recognized that. We definitely knew that. My colleagues were all super professional, and I had great, amazing people like Bunny Murdoch, Catherine Murdoch, and Lucky Roosevelt, my boss, the ambassador, and Julie Andrews, who's named Julie Petersmeyer now. Those people were really great role models for me in teaching me the ropes on how to handle the protocol side of things. And certainly a lot of people in the White House, my boss, Jim Hooley, et cetera, were just amazing teachers.
Yeah.
So they set the standard. They also, one of the things that Jim Hooley said to me was, we work at this, you work as
the
a
pleasure of the
appointee
president.
at the pleasure of the president. You
Right.
do not, there's no job security actually as a political appointee, which is fascinating given that the government puts all these rules on companies to create job security, et cetera, but they don't have it in a political spectrum. So but he basically, we were an extension of the president. We were an extension of the presidency beyond that president. So we were there to represent well our country, and that was really a number one importance in everything, in how we conducted ourselves.
Right, because presidency rolls over every 4 to 8 years, and the United States, doesn't.
Exactly.
You end up starting a company called Practical Protocol. What was the idea behind that? What was the vision behind that?
It was sort of what I knew how to do at that point. And I knew I wanted to start my own business because I'd had this great representation from my parents that it was an interesting life course, I guess. And I knew how to put delegations together and logistics. And I was very fortunate, because the Secretariat of the National Security Council at the time, a guy named Bill Sitman, who has since passed, was asked by the Nelson Mandela group. Nelson Mandela had recently been released from prison, and he was coming to the United States to see George Bush and other people and see Congress and et cetera. And the group that was organizing it said, "Do you have anybody you suggest who could help us organize Washington?" Because they just wanted somebody who knew what they were doing. And he said, I have the right person for you. So Nelson Mandela was my very first client. And that
amazing.
Just great trajectory from that point forward.
One of my most interesting interviews was interviewing his official photographer, who was his official photographer for the last 10 years of his life, Mandiba's life. What was it like being around him? What did you learn from being around Nelson Mandela, especially that moment in time? So dramatic. He comes out of 28 years of being in prison on Robbins Island. What was it like when he comes to the United States?
He was as humble and kind and soft-spoken as you could ever imagine. And I talk about this a lot, that you could imagine an angry,
embittered,
vengeful,
sure, yeah,
hardened person, and he was not anything like that. And his wife at the time, Winnie Mandela, was actually more strident than he was, and I had very interesting and lovely interactions with her, but it was sort of interesting to see the difference when we went up to, when something got lost. I think she had a headdress, that came in a box, and we were literally walking around the hotel trying to find it in this loading dock and everything, because she knew what it looked like. Because I'm coming with you, I'll find it. So it was fun. I mean, we talked about their grandchildren, all of this, and then we went up to Capitol Hill, and there were people in the hallway somewhere had come in to kind of demonstrate positive. They were saying, "Winnie, Winnie, Winnie." And she came out in the hall, and the fist in the air, and it's like all of a sudden it was almost a transformation from this lady grandmother, interpersonal interaction that I was having, into the public persona, which was very different. Fascinating.
Yeah. That's an interesting first client to have for this business. Not too long later, you actually become a franchisee for Burger King, like your parents had.
I did.
And I'm kind of fascinated by, we have these different seasons in our life where I used to joke when I was at the White House. I mean, anyone will return your call. You can call literally anyone in the world, be like, yeah, you have them call me back. Yeah, call me back at the White House. And like anyone will call you back. And then you leave. And
Yes.
then it takes some adjustment, right? And entrepreneurship sometimes is knocking on a lot of doors. So what was that like for you starting a Burger King franchise? Totally different world from the stuff, negotiating with world leaders and hanging out with Nelson Mandela.
Well, I got married. I met my husband down the hall. He worked in the press office, and so we got married after the administration was over, and we were talking about ways to, the political cycle. It's cyclical, right? It's a
Yeah.
2 year, 4 year, 8 year, if you're lucky. And we'd just come off of this, and he'd worked for 8 years in the White House. And so it was a very interesting time to say, what do we want to be when we grow up? And do we want to stay in that political realm? Well, since having grown up with Burger King, there was an opportunity to franchise Northern Virginia. And because there were no franchises there at the time. And so we just looked into it, and I asked him if he was interested, and he'd never worked at a fast food restaurant at that point in his life. And I'd spent most of my youth in a fast food restaurant. I knew that I did not want to be the day-to-day frontline person because I had had that experience, and my business was taking off, no pun intended, because I was going a lot of places. But I knew that if we were to do that, that he had to be the one who wanted to be the frontline day-to-day manager, operating partner, who could do the hiring and firing and do all that kind of stuff. I knew, even then, I knew that wasn't my forte or my strength. I was more of a visionary. And at the time, I didn't know I didn't know that word. I wouldn't have put it in those terms, but I'm a quick start and a visionary kind of person. And so I like to get in there and get things started, and then have somebody else take it over from there. And that's what he did. He was a great manager. He had great management skills. And so he was the guy who was the frontline person. I would come in and help open the restaurants and get them started and work into them till we got management trained up, and then move to the next restaurant. We built 10 restaurants in a short period of time. And it was kind of overwhelming, but it was a great experience for us in many ways. Our marriage did not last, but our partnership has prevailed, and I'm very grateful to have him as a business partner to this day, so many years later. And he still remains one of the most trusted people in my entire life, and I'm so grateful for the entire experience. But it's a very different experience working on the front line of a Burger King than it is flying around with Nelson Mandela or the Pope or Lech Walesa of Poland, or name your world leader. So
yeah, people are upset their fries are soggy, right? Like it doesn't matter. Like, oh, I don't care that you worked with Lech Walesa. Like I want my crispy fries.
So it gave me great perspective on both sides of it, right?
Yeah.
I used to say, from the Burger King to the Queen of England, it's all the same to me. It's all about really great customer service and focus on the client. And in the Burger King, the client is that person on the other side of the counter wanting hot French fries and a good hamburger, and a clean environment to eat it in. So it's all the same. It's just delivery of that product or service, and doing it with a smile, and doing it with the best intent and the highest level of professionalism, and having that attitude. So for me, it's fundamentally the same, even though the work is different.
Yeah. That's probably a great segue into the book you published in 2020, which was Civility Rules.
Yes.
You published it at a time when I think a lot of people were talking about civility, or a lack of civility that we had, even 20, 30 years ago when you and I were working in politics. What inspired the writing of the book?
I had been asked to write a chapter for a book called The Power of Civility. And it was about, they said, do you want to write about political civility or international civility? Well, I'd been in the international civility realm for a long time. And I thought, well, let me take a stab at political civility. And so I went around and interviewed all the people that I'd worked with, and a lot of names you would know, a lot of kind of famous political people and media people, et cetera. Many of them have passed on now. I'm so glad I got a chance to talk to them all about this. And I wrote a kind of a long chapter for the book on political civility, which I realized after I was writing, this could be, the topic is ripe for an entire book about the subject, about civility in general. And the lesson from the political civility chapter was there really hasn't been, and then it's kind of an oxymoron. There's no such thing as political civility. And as we we go through each new political cycle, I think more and more people would agree,
Yeah.
with that concept. But that doesn't relieve us of the responsibility to try to attain a level of civility in life and in politics and in everything we do.
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
a member of society, I believe that's a personal responsibility that we have.
Yeah. And I also think, tell me what you think of this. I feel like we go through these kind of waves and patterns where civility may wane and then it increases and it wanes. It kind of goes back and forth, and it might be personality driven. It might be who's in office. I do agree that there's less civility now than there was 30 or 40 years ago. But I don't think that, and we're recording this, I should say, in October of 2024. I don't think that it will always be the way that it is now. At least I hope not.
Well, to your point, there's interesting dynamics in the people who are running for office and but the parties, I find them both to be equally uncivil in their approach and a lot of things, and that people could argue that with me. That's fine, but I could pull out lots of examples where the flame throwing and the mudslinging and the tomatoes are equally ripe on both sides. And so that's disappointing to me, but I can't change that. What I can change is what I bring to the game, and what I hope by writing the book Civility Rules which is creating a purposeful practice of civility, the subtitle of the book. It's about what we bring to the game, because I can't make you civil. I can't demand civility out of you, especially if I'm not civil. So It starts with us. It starts with the individual and what we put out there as far as energy and approach to everything. And so that's my hope, is just by sort of explaining that or talking about my own philosophy on it, that maybe somebody else might be inspired by it and play along. It's not, I don't believe in legislating civility. I think that gets right down into freedom of speech, which is a big core element of what I talk about in the book. This is the point of, I believe civility is necessary to preserve freedom of speech, not to squelch it, but it's a very fine line when we get into legislating behavior. And I'm in favor of that.
It's an interesting point, because when you have like the floor of the Senate, you have very specific, strict rules around civility and what you can say and what you can't say. And then there's also just kind of decorum. There's customs, which in last couple of years we've seen some people getting in trouble for violating those customs, right?
Yeah, it rubs people the wrong way minimally, and it causes other challenges societally. When it's really ratchet, when the rhetoric gets ratcheted up.
Yeah. You also started the Global School of Entrepreneurship during COVID. What inspired that?
I was asked to be a part of a task force for the Entrepreneurs Organization, which we both belong to and loved so much. And they were looking into an idea of accredited programming for the learning, because EO is a learning organization. So how do we get accredited learning for our members? Is that something that's doable? Because traditional education, traditional academia is out there, but even the programs that EO has with Harvard and all those things are not for credit. They are executive education programs.
Yeah.
So the task force met and we figured it out. And that's the short story. There's a longer story there, but we figured out how to accredit the learning, presented it to the board of EO, which was great. And it was nice. And then COVID hit the next day and the entire world shut down. So it was at a logical time that everybody then began to focus on, for members, they had to focus on delivering value to the members in a different way and helping members survive, so the focus was not on that anymore. But we said, this is a moment in time that we've figured this out and we broke the code on it. And if we let this go, it would be a waste. So do you mind if we take it private, and we'll come back to you to work with you to help benefit the members. But in the meantime, we've created a business that is we call it a new way to MBA. It's a new paradigm for academia, and there's just lots of facets to it. But the bottom line is we have an MBA for entrepreneurs is one of our main solid products. And then, but we also have programs where we can take people's books. I call it take your book to class. We take entrepreneurs' books and create a course, a accredited college master's level business course out of it,
Hmm.
that they can own their own intellectual property. You know, if you try to go to a
Wow.
college, you potentially lose control of your intellectual property. And that's not a formula that works well in the entrepreneurial world. So we're trying to empower entrepreneurs and at the same time give them opportunities for education that maybe they haven't had because they got out of college and started their, or they dropped out of college and started a business, or they always wanted an MBA but never could do it. Well, we figured out how to get that done.
I know for me personally, EO has been so meaningful for my educational journey. I went to law school, not business school. I should have gone to business school. So I got the wrong degree. But going through the EO Accelerator program, which the curriculum there is just largely based or primarily based on this book, Scaling Up by Vern
Yeah.
Harnish, which is an excellent book.
It is.
And then I know you and I have both been through the EMP program at MIT, which also is an amazing curriculum. And I say that, those programs have been like the MBA that I never had.
Yeah.
These days we need something that's more practical. I look at my kids and my kids like, good luck to Netflix because my kids don't even want to watch Netflix. They don't want to watch a half an hour show or an hour or an hour and a half long movie. They want to
Yeah.
watch very short little videos. And so there's a real shift that's happening where people want to consume information in a different way than previous generations did.
Well, what we can do with the EMP program or the what's known as the BOG EMP program, Birthing of Giants or Entrepreneurial Masters program and Accelerator, if you are a graduate of those, you are halfway to an MBA with us. We can give you 50% credit
Cool.
towards an MBA. So then the MBA program only takes 1 year and roughly half the money. So
Mm.
the cost of our program is a lot less than most traditional MBA programs because we don't have the brick and mortar, we don't have the overhead, the legacy of thousands of research professors and all of that stuff. We are very pragmatic. It's about real world experience, and we call it it's the Oxford tutorial method, which is a group of people who get together and are facilitated in a conversation about the subject matter rather than lectured to, rather than
Mm.
the Harvard lecture,
Yeah.
case
All right.
study.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
may read a case
Socratic
study as
method.
part of your homework,
Yeah.
but when you get into class, it's about what you talk about and sharing your own experiences, much like EO loves to share experiences. It's about sharing your experiences with each other and learning from each other in a facilitated way with a professor. That's as much a part of your grade and your program and your graduation requirements as reading the case study.
I love these varying different winding paths that we all take. So you tackled working at the White House, international summits, State Department, starting your own company, Burger King franchisee. Why not just start a new accredited university in the midst of a global pandemic? But I'd love to know for you, like, what was that like building? You still are building it, but what has it been like for you building an accredited university in the midst of a global pandemic compared to all the things that you've done previously in your career?
In some strange way, the pandemic for many people may feel similarly that there was this strange lull that gave us some space. I mean, I'm not an advocate of a pandemic, believe me, but looking at the glass as half full and
Yeah.
much as possible, the benefits of being sort of cloistered away was that you had a little bit more time to focus and drill down on things and get something launched, and whereas if you were busy going out and doing your things that you normally do without a pandemic, it might take a little longer. So we were able to get this up and stand it up in a short period of time and really work through a variety of business models with it. So in a way, it was a little bit of a luxury, but I don't recommend it and I don't want to repeat it, but just tried to use it to
Yeah.
advantage.
I love these stories, Shelby. Thank you so much for your time here today. I want to wrap up with my final question, which is I'm a big fan of gratitude, and I'm a big fan of giving my guests the opportunity in the space to recognize, shout out, acknowledge people, especially peers or contemporaries that have been with you through your journey, through your career. Anyone in particular you'd want to shout out and thank?
Oh my gosh. You know what's so funny is when I think about that, and I just updated my Civility Rules acknowledgements page, which was already 4 pages long.
Now it's 6 pages long.
Yeah, now it's 6 pages long.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in gratitude and acknowledgement to people. And so I had 4 pages. I mean, some people put 2 or 3 names. I have 4 pages of names of people who helped me along the way in any number of circumstances. So for me, everything from Ronald Reagan to the people I mentioned earlier, obviously my family for sure. My partner in Burger King, Ben Jarrett, who is my ex-husband, and my current partner, David Nielsen, who we just talked to, Dave Galbensky, my partner in the Global School of Entrepreneurship, and even Guy Fieri, of all people, which we've not talked about, but who's been an interesting teacher to me.
Who my brother works with. So funny small world.
He does? Is that right?
Yeah.
Who's that?
We'll talk about it offline.
That's
My brother
fun.
works
Okay.
in reality TV, so that's funny.
That's
small
deep.
world.
Small world always. So
Another good Californian.
Yes,
Yes,
for sure.
Yeah.
So you end up, I'm just grateful to everybody. And that sounds a little trite and a little too general, but there's just, I have a group that we call the Witches, who are all former or current EO members. And we call ourselves the Witches because we make magic happen. And when we get together, it's fun. We just, brainstorm with each other and help each other sort through all of our stuff. So it's like a mini forum. Is Maureen Birdsall and Lori Gallagher and Jennifer Bunkers and a woman named Joanna Bloor. So all these people, probably most of them. Yeah. And we just, Great. I'm a big believer in getting out there and just connecting with as many people as possible, because you never know, and not looking for the outcome, not looking for the transaction, but just being open to the relationship.
Yeah, for sure. Shelby, this has been such a pleasure. Where can people go to learn more about you and the Global School of Entrepreneurship and your various different books and connect with you?
They can go to ShelbyScarbrough.com, and if they spell it wrong, they'll still get there. So it should be
all
there.
The different spellings. Good.
Yeah, awesome. Different spellings and stuff. So yeah, that would be the simplest way.
Shelby, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.